Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Newcastle High School's Crouch Auditorium for tonight's gubernatorial debate, sponsored by the Newsletter Journal. Before we begin, we need to give a special thank you, first of all, to Weston County School District Number 1 for allowing us use of this facility here tonight to gather, and secondly, and just importantly, to RT Communications for providing live streaming of this debate and this event so other people around Wyoming can attend online and even send their questions to us. My name's Bob Bonner. I'm the publisher and editor of the Newsletter Journal, the sponsor for this debate. Seated to my right is Democratic candidate for governor Pete Gosar, and to my left is the independent candidate Don Wills. Quickly, to bring you up to speed on what the format for tonight's debate will be, this is a citizen-driven debate, meaning that you, the people here in the audience, and those who are attending online, are invited to submit your questions that I will read to the candidates and give each of them 2 minutes to answer. If you are in the audience, have a question, please write them on the sheet that's been provided to you. My daughter Summer will be standing in the back. If you just hold that sheet up when your question is done, she'll retrieve it and bring it up to me in between questions so that we can ask the candidates those questions. Again, the format, each candidate will be given 2 minutes to answer the questions posed by those of you in the audience, both online and here. And then we'll move on to the next question. To begin with, I'm going to allow each candidate a 2-minute opening statement. And when we are ready to wrap it up, an hour from now, each candidate will have a minute to provide a closing statement for the folks that are attending online and here in the auditorium tonight. So without further ado, I know anybody who is paying attention to this is interested in hearing what these two candidates have to say. I will allow them to now introduce themselves. I'll start on my left, just because that's the way I happen to lean at the time, and allow Mr. Don Wills to introduce himself to you. 2 minutes, Don.
Thanks, Bob. And I would like to also thank RT Communications for live streaming this, for the high school for providing the facilities, and for Bob and his company to organize it and make this happen. Debate is very important if we're going to have an electorate who is engaged and understands the issues and makes intelligent decisions. It's unfortunate that there's only 2 of us up here tonight, but I think we can probably do a pretty good job of discussing the issues and hopefully informing you, the voters, as to what our positions are and what the issues, quite frankly, are. I'm Don Wills. I'm a small businessman. I am not a lawyer. I am a computer programmer by trade. I own a national software company that provides software to the wholesale fruit and vegetable distribution industry. So I've got a very different take on what I think government can do and it should do. My basic platform is one of limited government and frugal spending and a pushback against the federal overreach of many issues that affect Wyoming and the people of Wyoming. These are the 2 reasons I really got involved in the campaign. Quite frankly, I would not have been involved if either Taylor Haynes or Cindy Hill won the primary, but they didn't. So I'm here to provide you with an alternative that is a limited government alternative in the general election. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Wills. Mr. Gosar.
Well, thank you, Bob, and I'd like to thank Weston One and RT Communication and all of you for being here, not also in the live audience, but also online. I think this is really important. This was an idea that my campaign hatched about and said, you know, more debate is always better than less. And to have this opportunity and to have Don, I would like to thank Don also for coming. This is important. I'm a small town Wyoming kid, born and raised in Pinedale. And maybe like many of you in the audience, we didn't get an opportunity to engage as much as we would have liked to have with our elected officials. And this now, the technology of the world today, allows us to do that. And so I'm really happy to have this opportunity. And what a great opportunity. For me, as a kid growing up in Pinedale, I was an undersized kid with oversized dreams. And I had an opportunity to work really hard and get some people along the way that helped me out and make a dream come true. I played for the University of Wyoming a long time ago, and it was a dream come true, but I understand the work that it required, and I also understand the people that I was so fortunate enough to have met along the way. And so for me, government's about helping with opportunity, getting a level playing field so kids can get on the field and allow their opportunities, their abilities, their skills to either succeed or fail, however they choose, but to have that ability through education or healthcare or a different way of looking at our economy once again. You know, this is a challenging times, and we're doing some great stuff in Wyoming, but we could do a little bit better, and we could really lead in healthcare and education and many places, but we're going to have to put that as our goal and work at it.
Thank you, Mr. Gosar. We do want to point out that all 4 candidates for governor were invited to this forum tonight, and we too appreciate that Mr. Gosar and Mr. Wills were able to make the trip to Newcastle and attend. With that, we will jump right into questions and just show everybody that they're listening around the state. We'll take our first one online. This from Casper. Given the reality of climate change and the need to move economies forward, how will you help Wyoming further its transition to a green economy? Mr. Gosar.
Well, thank you, and it's an apropos question. And so I think that if you look at some of the EPA regulations and you look at your life, or I look at my life, I always feel like your future's better left in your own hands, that you find a way to innovate. I'm a son of an oil field worker, and my dad worked 40-some years in the oil fields, and the drilling that can happen now that they would never have envisioned when he was working. And so I think we apply that to our coal and natural gas and oil. I think there's an opportunity to meet the market with all those things that we do well in Wyoming. We have a great university and great community colleges. We have expertise abound in Wyoming. We have that ability to do those things. We've done them before in the oil patch and the gas fields, and I don't know why we couldn't do it in the coal fields. And so I think that you have to have that opportunity to take the future in your hands and say, well, you know, you can either sue, but I don't think you sue your way to success. I think once and for all, you make your traditional energy sources match the markets they require, and then you don't have to worry about the EPA, or you don't have to worry about anybody else changing that for you.
Thank you, Mr. Gosar. Mr. Wills.
I, too, agree that we should take matters into our own hands. Unfortunately, the EPA isn't going to allow that to happen, at least with regard to coal. Wyoming has resources galore: oil, coal, gas, wind. We could be the energy source for the United States for years to come. And yet we're fighting with the federal government to get permits to drill, to get permits to mine coal, and so on and so forth. And that's just simply wrong. We can do it here ourselves. We've proven as a state that we can very effectively manage fracking so that it is not a danger to the environment. We were one of the first states that actually collected the information about what chemicals are used in the fracking. It has happened here very successfully. The one case in Pavilion where there was some water contamination is from decades-old well that is only 700 feet deep, so it has no relevance whatsoever in the fracking argument that is going on right now. Quite frankly, we as a country are not capable of making that big of a dent, because in the world, pollution, whether it's you call carbon dioxide pollution or not, is an issue that I take questions with. But let's assume that it is an issue. China is the largest producer of CO2 now, and it has been shown that the single best thing to decrease pollution and to move towards future technologies is prosperity, is wealth. And the way you do that is you absolutely pay attention to creating a more vibrant economy.
Thank you, Mr. Wills. Now, the first answer to the next question will be for Mr. Wills. What is your position on early childhood education, especially children ages birth through 5 who have developmental delays and disabilities?
That's a special situation that probably needs a little more attention. Quite frankly, it doesn't fit into any regimented standard mechanism, because children who are developmentally handicapped or slow, or whatever phrase you want to use, that have certain deficiencies that need to be rectified before they hit first grade, there's going to be a whole slew of different, a spectrum of different situations that need to be dealt with in very different situations. So I'm not sure that a traditional school district should be responsible for that. I think that historically school districts have tried to provide that because they're the only game in town, per se. But I think it maybe needs to have a little bit more of a public-private partnership because of the special needs, and in addition, because of the low population of Wyoming. There's going to be a long distance between some of the kids' needs and where these special resources are. So I think we need to think outside of the back box with regard to education in all regards, but in the situation with special education, I think that's even more important.
Thank you, Mr. Wills. Mr. Gosar, same question.
Well, thank you. And this is something that's very near and dear to me as a member of the State Board of Education. You get an opportunity to look through education policy and see where you have the most ability to help. And certainly early childhood education and access to that fits that mold for me. When I go around the state, I really like to visit early childhood development programs, and I visited one here today. And it's always remarkable what you see. And you see the lives that people, these good people change, and how they impact folks. And you know, if you're going to spend money in education, you spend it early. You'll learn more in the first 3 years in your brain, and make those connections, and you will in any other 3 years in your life. And so you can spend early and produce really healthy, helpful kids, and help the system all the way through. You have them more prepared for kindergarten and then on the way through. Or you don't, and there are social programs that are less effective on the other end, and juvenile delinquent homes. I think if you look at the studies, you look at how different kids can be when they come to a kindergarten class. Some can have a couple hundred words of vocabulary, some can have a few thousand. And they're very perceptive. I have a 3-year-old and a 1.5-year-old niece and nephew, and you see they understand. They're very perceptive, and so I think sometimes the dropouts start a lot earlier than 15 or 16. Sometimes they start in fifth, when they're 5 years old, or in kindergarten, when they understand that, you know, that kid next to me has 5,000 or 6,000 words and I have a couple hundred. Maybe I don't really, maybe school's not for me. And I think we really have to spend time, effort, and an overall idea on how to do early childhood education accessible for places all throughout Wyoming. It's the best money spent.
Thank you, Mr. Gosar. Our next question came from 2 different individuals in the audience, and Mr. Gosar, you're up first this time. I strongly oppose same-sex marriage to be legalized in Wyoming. What is your stance on this issue?
Well, for me, it comes down to a citizen issue and an equal rights position. I support marriage for all of Wyoming families, and because the 14th Amendment is pretty clear. I think the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals that ruled some months ago made that clear. I think the Supreme Court of the United States refusing to overturn their ruling also made that fairly clear. And as you're your governor, you have to sit with your Attorney General. I'm not an attorney either. But you sit with your Attorney General and you say, well, we have a finite set of resources in the state. Where is the world headed? 41 lawsuits since June of 2013, federal, state, and federal appeal courts have upheld the 10th Circuit Court's ruling. We have equal protection under the law. And then the Constitution is pretty straightforward. We have no second-class citizens in Wyoming or the United States, and what right is afforded to one has to be afforded to all. And for me, you know, this is something that we need to talk about. I think that you'll see this week or in the coming weeks that the world will change, and I'm wondering, you know, Governor Meade has continued on this path, and I'm not sure that anybody can really make a strong case that he's spending useful resources fighting this. It's been pretty straightforward in the last few months. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gosar. Same question, Mr. Wills?
I find it a bit disingenuous by my opponent on this stage that he relies upon court cases which are the result of lawsuits, and yet in other regards he thinks that too many lawsuits is a bad thing. The federal courts are going to be making law in Wyoming. There's nothing we can do about that until they actually change our law. And whether or not that's valid or not is a matter of opinion. That's what courts render, is opinions. And the reality is, I think it's a stretch to apply the 14th Amendment to the institution of marriage, which is a centuries-old, millennia-old institution that is a religious institution and is a common law institution. Words matter. The definition of words matters. Marriage had a definition throughout most of human history. It is now being redefined, and it's unfortunate that that word is being linked to an agenda by a group of well-intentioned individuals who are trying to gain certain rights. And I understand that. There was the gay couple that showed up in the courthouse in Albany County brought out 100 places or 500 places in statutes where they were being discriminated against. I would support fixing those types of discrimination, just like you should be able to have an adult child take over conservatorship if you are medically impaired or whatever. So there are ways to do this without going to the gay marriage route. So I'm opposed to gay marriage, and I would push back against the federal government after the feds tell us that our laws are no longer valid.
Thank you, Mr. Wills. You'll get the first answer to this question, and it's another one from our online audience. How do you plan on combating gender discrimination in Wyoming?
I'm not even sure what the question refers to. If it's referring to a study that one of the liberal think tanks put out recently, that there is a gender disparity in wages in the state of Wyoming, then I actually disagree with the results of that study. As I said a week ago, there are lies, there are damned lies, and then there are statistics. And any statistics that say that the gender wage gap is totally and only a function of the fact that one side of it is female and the other is male, I just don't agree with that. It's the same thing that the climate change people do. If you take out some of the controlling factors, you can prove just about anything you'd like to prove with numbers. And so I'm not sure there is a wage gender gap, and I don't even know what the question's referring to, if it's something further along, you know, something other than the wage gap. So I'm sorry, but I just don't agree that there is a significant problem in this state.
Thank you, Mr. Wills. Mr. Gosar, same question.
Well, you know, with Mr. Wills, we wouldn't have much of a wage gap in Wyoming because he wants to take his business people and move them in Texas and along the country. And so I think that for Mr. Wills to say that is just remarkable. As a kid who born and raised here in Wyoming, I think that it's just not one study, it's just repeated studies. And so if you look at the gender-based wage gap, if you strip out all those things that deal with choice, so the choice of a place where somebody works, the choice of a job, the choice of the education, the choice to have a family, all those things that choice could account for, there's still 9 or 10 cents. And how do you account for that? Well, most experts in the field, and unlike Mr. Wills, I'm not an expert in every field. I trust those experts, and they say, you know, this has to do with unequal pay for equal work. not being hired in the gas fields initially, not being advanced in the gas fields maybe consequently. I think there was a great opportunity to listen on NPR the story of a lady who had been a supervisor at the state of Wyoming, and how she supervised somebody who made $10,000 more than she did. And the excuse was that this gentleman had a family, and she said this whole time, I've had a family. And so you have to work on that. And you have to do as a governor, you do what you take care of your own house. You look at the state and you say, are we doing things fairly as the state? Can we do things better? Can we extend those ideas to those contractors with the state? If we have some traction, maybe that's another place. And then let's have an open and honest discussion about it, because it's really not just an individual issue. This is a family issue, this is a societal issue, this is a fairness issue. And it's my assertion that until you do it right, you won't really have the equality state moniker as fully defined as you could.
Thank you, Mr. Gosar. And I will ask for you to answer this question first. Shifting gears away from gender politics for a minute, we'll let everybody catch their breath. Did you support the passage of the Wyoming lottery, and why?
Well, I support the lottery, and I think that there's an opportunity to put that money towards useful things, and I think many of those going to the municipalities is a smart place to put it. I would like to see maybe some of those places that we have some underfunding. Early childhood ed, for me, is a great place for some money throughout the state. That one benefits us all, whether you have kids or you don't have kids. You all benefit from an educated populace, and I truly believe that that's money well spent. So I did support the lottery, and I think that we'll see how it plays out in the next few years, but I think it was an idea that was long overdue, and we'll try it and see how it goes.
Thank you, Mr. Gosar. Mr. Wills, same question.
What a hypocritical idea to allow government to do something that for decades was against the law in the state of Wyoming, because it was deemed to be so dangerous that people couldn't be trusted to go out and gamble on their own. And yet, when they decided they were short on money and they needed to tax us a little more, they decided, okay, well, all of that idea that it was immoral or unethical, or we needed to protect people from their own dumb moves of gambling, that the state then takes it over and actually takes control of it. I mean, this to me is just the opposite of what a government is supposed to be. The purpose of government is to protect your liberty, to protect your property, to make sure that people don't steal your stuff, and that if problems do arise, that those problems are adjudicated fairly. For them to be in the business of wholesaling alcohol, where there's no private wholesaling of alcohol in the state, in the business of gambling, where there's no private gambling other than on the reservations, on several other things that government has no business being in. And so to me, it's just totally hypocritical. I was not in a position to actually vote for it. I would have vetoed the Wyoming lottery bill had it come to my desk as governor.
Thank you, Mr. Wills. And I'll allow you to field this question first. And now we're going to shift to some senior citizen issues, actually, is how the questions are shaking out right now. This one's a little longer. When was the last time the amount of investment a spouse can keep when their partner has to go into a long-term care facility been adjusted, and what is your position on this? In today's economy, $125,000 is simply not adequate.
I don't know when the last time it was adjusted. And I, quite frankly, have no answer for that particular question. It's not come up. I've had hundreds of questions, and so I'm not going to try to make up an answer here in front of you guys today.
Okay. Mr. Wills. Mr. Gosar, would you care to tackle that one?
Well, I don't have much experience with it also. But what I do know, as I travel around, that there is not enough I don't know what that amount is, but it's not enough. And you see many of our senior citizens facilities undergoing some very difficult staffing decisions, openings right and left, because they can't fill those roles because they don't have enough money to pay people adequately. So I think that that's something that we need to look at, and I wish I had that answer, but I do not.
Bad form for the moderator to exit stage left in the middle of something, but I had a new question come up, so I had to get it rounded up for you. Mr. Gosar, we'll stay with senior citizen issues and ask you to answer this one first. And not necessarily just seniors, but I'm sure they come under this umbrella. What is your stance on help for veterans who were promised to be taken care of in their senior years and then are told that they aren't eligible? And what could you do about that as governor of Wyoming?
Well, I think for me, the veterans and the service that they provided is immeasurable, and as long as you have veterans available to you, then you have to take care of them. And in the light of federal budget cuts, we have many homeless veterans, and occasionally I go from town to town, and I like food banks to work in there to get a feel. It's something I believe in, and you see veterans, and it's heartbreaking. And I know that, maybe this is something where the state needs to step in. Those people are people who have given a lot to our society. And we need to find a way to take care of them. We met a gentleman in the library in Sheridan who is struggling to get medications for his PTSD. And it was tough. It was really difficult to watch, and it was something that you think maybe certainly we can do. We've sweep hundreds of millions of dollars into coffee cans every year without a reason sometimes. Here's a legitimate reason. Here's what you should do. You have to take care of those folks. They took care of you at one point, and I think this is a place where the state could step in.
Thank you, Mr. Gosar. Mr. Wills, same question.
This is a prime example of government failure. The problem with government is it does almost nothing particularly well, and particularly when it tries to spread out and do hundreds and hundreds of things, and I'm talking about federal government and state government here, it does all of them even less well. The number one thing that I think the Department of Defense and the federal government should be paying attention to, other than a few defense and immigration issues, is the care of those warriors who have gone overseas and have come back wounded or need care in some fashion. This is just heinous, and this is the fault of the federal government. Now, for the state of Wyoming to have to step in and fix what the federal government can't do right is just a prime example of the failure of government. We need to rein in government at the state level and at the federal level to those issues that are really, really important, and those issues that are delegated to the federal government or are reserved to the states. And the more it gets into and the more it tries to fix everything, the less it's going to pay attention to those few functions that are absolutely critical. And the care of veterans is one of those functions. So please be suspicious of government. Do not look to government for the solution to everything that ails us. This, however, is one that we should make sure happens. And if the state has to get involved, I'll work with the legislature and we'll put in some backstop program. But this is an example of the failure of liberalism, of the failure of big government. And so I think you need to look at the big picture before we decide to do anything on the state level for veterans.
Thank you. And Mr. Wills, this question will go first to you. And this is one from our local audience, a subject near and dear to those of us in Weston County. And I'll read you the direct wording. What is your stance on the unconstitutional nature of the most recent redistricting in Wyoming?
I understand Wyoming split up Newcastle right down the middle and, in essence, took away political power from this corner of the state. This just gets to the good old boy network that runs the state of Wyoming. These people basically set up their districts so that the incumbents who existed at the time were protected. So it wasn't that they were out to get you guys here in Newcastle. You were just one of the pieces in the puzzle, and it's the way the puzzle fit together. And that gets to a bigger issue that really comes with this state, and that is the Good Old Boy Network basically runs the whole show. And Meade is one of the prime actors. Governor Meade is one of the prime actors in that Good Old Boy Network. And, you know, citizens, you're way down on the totem pole, pecking order pole, with regard to what makes sense, what is right, what is fair. So the reality is, yeah, they weren't picking on you because you happened to not be that the population isn't that large or anything. You just got caught in the crossfire between some political powers that you don't have any control over here, nor do I. I mean, the reality is there is a small Good Old Boy Network that runs the state of Wyoming, and those guys do whatever they want, and you just happen to be in the wrong place at the wrong time.
Thank you, Mr. Wills. Mr. Gosar, same question.
You know, I would agree with a lot of what Mr. Wills said. However, this is not the only place where that happens. If you look throughout the state, there's some interesting boundaries drawn. And I think that there needs to be a fair way of doing this. And I think the county clerks had a nice opportunity. I took a look at their map before the districts were drawn officially, and I thought it was a fairer way of doing things, and I thought it was based on a collaborative effort and people that didn't have a whole lot of dog in this hunt. And I think that quite honestly, if you're looking for a little more fairness, I think it's better to put somebody outside the system to have an idea on how to make those voting districts a little more fair. And I think that was an opportunity that was often missed, and it was awfully missed here and in other places.
Thank you, Mr. Gosar. This is a two-part question on the same issue. I'm going to try combining some of these because we're getting enough questions. I'd like to get to as many of them as we can. And this one is a Second Amendment gun control issue. The two parts of the question is the previous governor signed the concealed carry bill in Wyoming. Would you also have supported it? The second part of the question is in reference to the number of gun bills that were stymied in the Senate after passing the House in the last session, and could you give us an explanation of that mechanism and why those bills were defeated in one side of the Capitol and not the other?
Boy, I wish I was in on those. I was working. But you know, I think Wyoming's gun laws are adequate. I do. And I think that if there needs to be an extension into schools and bars and churches, then it needs to go into the legislature and the governor's office. What's good for one is good for all. And I think that sometimes we've carved out places that you know, that we don't want to do that. I'm a lifelong hunter, born and raised in western Wyoming, and I think that we're adequate. I think we spend a lot of time where we could be spending some other time, much more time on things that are really have escaped us, workplace safety, gender-based wage inequality, those things that have escaped us. Our laws are pretty straightforward in guns in Wyoming, and I'm a supporter of the Second Amendment, always have been. But you know, let's talk about those things that have escaped us and that we never bring up at all.
Thank you, Mr. Gosar. Mr. Wills, same question.
Yay, finally got a Second Amendment question. At Casper the other day, we didn't have any discussion whatsoever of something that's very important to me and to many people in this state. You will notice that Mr. Gosar did not answer the question as to whether or not he would have signed the license-free concealed carry bill. I would have signed that bill, and I think we need to go farther. There were two bills that were introduced in the House in the last session that were supposedly gun rights bills. One bill would have allowed citizens who had concealed carry permits to carry concealed only on any school property across the state of Wyoming with no exceptions, no carve-outs, no ability for you know, the schools to opt out or anything like that. And that was the good gun bill. The bad gun bill was introduced, believe it or not, by some Republicans, and that bill was a pretend gun rights bill. It was a fake gun rights bill. The bill basically said that teachers and administrators could carry concealed with a concealed carry permit if they were trained with some special extra training, which is fine, but only if the local school board approved it, which would have created a hodgepodge of school districts across the state. We would have had 30 or 40 school districts with 50, 75 people showing up at school board meetings, fighting it out, and in the end, there would have been maybe 10 school districts across the state that would have allowed guns to be carried by the teachers only. That's the fake gun bill. That fake gun rights bill was the one that Meade pushed and the one that the establishment pushed. I would have vetoed that bill, and I would have pushed for the good gun bill where citizens can carry on school property.
Thank you, Mr. Wills. You get the first answer to the next question, and this one's a little more general. Why do you believe you appeal to younger voters?
That's an interesting one. I'm 64 years old, and my opponent is quite a bit younger than me. What was Ronald Reagan's line? I won't quote it. I think that my mix of a little bit of libertarianism, not a lot, but a little bit of libertarianism fits very nicely with the freedom that young people have, of all generations, have always wanted to experience. I don't want government in your bedroom. I don't want government in your telephone. I don't want government looking in your window. I don't want government to do a whole lot, quite frankly. And I think that's attractive to a lot of younger people, that they really just want to be left alone. Let's face it, we all just want to be left alone. And then comes along, well, it's for the children, or we have to be worried about the terrorists, or this or that. And people, for whatever reason, start to give up their freedoms and give up their liberties. What's the old saying? He gives up a little liberty for safety, will lose it all. I botched that quote of Ben Franklin, I think. Anyway, the point is, the reality of government is that it wants to be the nanny state. Left to its own devices, the bureaucracy will take more and more power and will steal your liberties on a slow burn kind of basis. And young people want to have liberty. Young people want to do whatever they want to do. They want to be free to do what they want to do. So I think my message of limited government actually rings well with young people. Ron Paul's a good example. He's even older than me. And he also played well with the younger folks. So I think the message of liberty is universal, and I think young people, appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Wills. Mr. Gosar, why do you appeal to young voters?
Well, you hope that you appeal to all voters, and you do it the same way that I think it's been done in the past. I would disagree with Mr. Wills. He's more than happy to get into people's bedrooms, and I think that that's sometimes where the libertarian part of Mr. Wills breaks down. So what do you do to meet voters? Every Wednesday, we host a live chat for 2 hours, any question, anytime on Facebook. That's me on the other end, and I think that is incredibly scary as a candidate, because you know that you're going to write something that can come back to haunt you. But it's that access that really matters. And then you go to people's homes and you knock on their doors. Nearly 15,000 doors my team has knocked on in Wyoming in the last 3 months. You get a chance to ask people, what do you need? What could you do? What could we do better in Wyoming? What do you think is the biggest issue in Wyoming? And then you listen. And so I think that that's really important, because I just don't go to people's homes. You go down to places of business, and you talk to people on the street, and I think that that's really important. Whether it's young people or old people or anywhere in between people, those issues and that availability, that access, I think is so important. I think the world is changing in politics. Many of my competitors don't realize it. I think they miss the opportunity to meet with folks. I think they miss the opportunity to chat with them on Facebook and social media, because there's an opportunity to learn. Every time, every Wednesday, I've taken away something and I've become a better candidate, I think, because of something somebody has said, or somebody has said, you know, Pete, we need you to know a little bit more, and they'll direct me. And that's very, very good, and I appreciate it. And I think that's hopefully how I appeal to all voters.
Thank you, Mr. Gosar. And the answer to you first on this question, what federal lawsuits, those between Wyoming and the federal government, would you not support, and which ones would you continue to defend?
Well, there's a list, and that's just a remarkable list. 30, as you saw today, in the Casper Star Tribune. Our neighboring states with about 4 apiece. And so which lawsuits would you not defend? I think the question, I object to the question, because I think some of those lawsuits started in response to not doing our job up front. I think if you look at the wolf issue, we're probably headed to court on the wolf issue. The judge didn't object to the plan. The judge objected to the non-bindingness of the plan. The fact that we hadn't done what we needed to do to make that plan certified. And I think that here we go again, an opportunity to have taken care of business. We had a couple of years to do that. I am a hunter, and I support the management of wolves. But we had a plan. And now, you know, Idaho and Montana, they're hunting wolves, and we're not. And you have to ask that question, why? Why do we always rush to suits? I think lawsuits, and as a person who's not a lawyer, a person who works for a living, the lawsuit is always the last option. You grab your neighbor's hand and you say, well, we need to figure this out. We need to go and talk about this. And I think, so I object to the question, because I think that the lawsuits are a failed policy and a failed ability to negotiate thorny issues.
Thank you, Mr. Gosar. Mr. Wills.
Yes, I unfortunately didn't get to read the article about the lawsuits. I did get interviewed by Laura Hancock on that, so I'd like to see what she said I said. Anyway, the issue of lawsuits, I have no problem with the lawsuits that Governor Meade has filed. My attitude is as follows. Yes, the first thing you try to do, I agree with Mr. Gosar on this, is you try to reason with the federal masters in Washington, D.C. And sometimes you can actually resolve some of the issues with reason and discussion and compromise even. In those cases where you can't, I think the next step is to sue them and hope for the best in a court of law, and hope that some judge doesn't have some ulterior motive or some other plan, or is just ill-informed on an issue. The problem I have with the Wolf decision is, you know, it's interesting. Back in the old Soviet Union, back when information was very sparse, there was an art form of reading between the lines of what really was being said in the newspapers versus what the reality was. And now think about this. This was a decision based upon a lawsuit by some tree-hugging group that basically called into question for a technicality in the Wyoming wolf management plan, which, by the way, was not hurried. It was actually multi-years in making. And the decision came down that the wolf hunt was stopped the day before the wolf hunt was supposed to happen, so that the judge's decision was the day before. Now, to me, I'm reading between the lines here and saying this isn't quite legit. This is a situation where there's something else going on here. And basically, I'm guessing that the wolf folks basically said, you know what, if we can get this judge to pull this one trick, we will be able to get one more year that the wolves don't get shot in Wyoming. So, call me a conspiracy theorist, but I think we need to read between the lines on this one.
Thank you, Mr. Wills. And then if you would answer this question first, we'll return to our online audience. Apparently some folks didn't make it in Casper when you were down there last week, because there's another one from Casper. What is your position on the effort to restructure education governance in Wyoming specifically with the State Board of Education's recommendation to appoint the Superintendent of Public Instruction. Mr. Wills.
I think that is the good old boy network run amok. They are upset that Cindy Hill actually tried to clean out the Department of Education, and that's what SF 104 was all about. It wasn't about accountability or anything else. It was about an outsider, Cindy Hill, who was coming into the Department of Education, who looked at all of the special contracts, the special deals, the top-heavy bureaucracy in Cheyenne. And essentially, she started to expose them, and so they got mad at her, and they went to the good old boy network, which was Lubnow and Ross, the Speaker of the House, President of the Senate, and Meade, and said, we got to get rid of her. She's dangerous. She's bad. And so they did SF 104. They thought they could get away with it because 25 years ago they did the same thing to the elected state auditor. If you don't know this, the elected state auditor is essentially a figurehead, does nothing. There is a department of the audit that is actually supposed to be doing all the audit. Guess who appoints the director of the Department of the Audit? The governor. That's what they want to do with the Superintendent of Public Instruction. They want to appoint somebody who can be controlled and not do the will of the people, but do the will of the good old boy network. So I am adamantly opposed to taking away the right to vote for the Superintendent of Public Instruction. Now they're talking about trying to put a constitutional amendment to do that up, and I will oppose any effort to do that. Quite frankly, interestingly, the governor has no say in that whatsoever. That's not something that can be vetoed by the governor. So if they get that through the legislature, then you're going to get to vote on it at some point in time in the future, and I will lobby against taking away your right to vote for the Superintendent of Public Instruction.
Thank you, Mr. Wills. Mr. Gosar, same question.
Well, I would echo some of the similar thoughts about the Superintendent of Public Instruction that Mr. Wills. I did not support it. I think that you know, you have an opportunity to have a person who sits on some very important boards, the SLIB board, the State Land Commission board, and oftentimes they don't have the voice of education without the Superintendent of Public Instruction on those boards, and I think that's important. I really do think that's important. I'm a member of the State Board of Education, but did not weigh in on that because it was not at the meeting. But if I would have voted against that. I think that it's a system of checks and balances, an elected superintendent and an appointed board. I think that always helps to have that balance between those two entities. I think that at the State Board of Education, we require that this Superintendent of Public Instruction help us quite a bit. We don't have much of a budget. They have to do some research for us, and they have to help to have us understand we're citizens first. I'm a pilot and a small business owner, and try as you might not know as much about testing or ferret as much about testing as without their help. And so it's very important from the State Board of Education perspective to have that system of checks. And I think for me, I always come down on the idea that I need to be compelled to change the Constitution of Wyoming. And right now, I don't think the case has been made. But you know, let's put it to the ballot if people want to do that, and I know which way I'll vote. And I appreciate the thoughts and the understanding from the State Board of Education, but I would have gone against the prevailing wind on that one.
Thank you, Mr. Gosar. This question to you first. Either of you, if elected, will face the challenge as governor of working with a Republican-dominated state legislature. How do you propose to handle those situations and issues as they arise?
Well, I think as a Democrat in Wyoming, you get the opportunity to work with people. You're not much in the majority, and that's all right. There's an opportunity to reach across the aisle and say, this is who I am, and I understand your perspective, and let's work on it. And so you always start that way. I think that's always the most meaningful way. I think that's the most straightforward way. I think that creates the best solutions and the most lasting solutions. That said, you have to have a firm hand sometimes and say, well, you know, I think that you've come into the executive branch a little bit too much. I think that has been missing in the last 4 years. And I think that when you go to something like a budget footnote that stopped the teaching of science, whether you agree with that perspective or not, you almost have to agree that the budget footnote process was not the way to do policy. And for me, as a governor, I certainly, on an appropriations bill, when I would have seen that, I would have line itemed that. If you're going to do something that stops a person's opportunity in education, well, you should have it out on both houses, both floors of the Senate and the legislature, because it's that important. And to do it in a budget footnote at the 11th hour is just not a place that policy should be done, and so I would have vetoed that.
Thank you, Mr. Gosar. Mr. Wills, same question.
Well, first of all, I've heard Mr. Gosar complain about a budget footnote. They do it all the time. It isn't really that much different than a regular part of the budget. So I don't think that the mechanism they used is particularly important to talk about. So it shouldn't be denigrated. With regard to working with a legislature, I'm an independent, so I don't have to identify with either side of the aisle. The reality is the Senate is pretty much just the good old boys. So I don't think it's going to make much difference whether it's a Democrat or Republican. If you're either part of the good old boy network or not part of the good old boy network, it's going to be a problem. But the key is the House. The House has about 10, 12 who are the good old boy network, the leadership, and about 10 or 12 who are truly frugal, limited government folks who I will identify with. And then there's about 35 or so that are in the middle, and they can go either way. And that's where leadership matters. That's where clear speech, clear thinking, clear policy that comes from the governor's office can actually convince quite a large number of these people on the that are in the middle in the Wyoming House. And so I think I would be able to work very effectively with the Wyoming House. Now, let's go back to the gun bills. Those two gun bills that I described earlier. They got kind of moved along by the House. The House didn't really want to deal with them, but there's a trick that they use in Cheyenne, and here's the trick. They basically say, oh boy, we as House members who get elected every 2 years, we can't take the risk that we're going to get called out on something, so we're going to take the safe vote, and they can go kill it in the Senate. That happens over and over and over again on subject after subject. So the Senate's going to be a problem for either me or Mr. Gosar.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Wills. And if you'd answer this question first, we'll go online again. Would you push for legislation to make non-custodial parents pay all of their child support on time?
Wow.
It's another one you didn't get in Casper, isn't it?
Wow. Not knowing the details of what the specifics are, I mean, what does on time mean? Is there going to be any leeway with regard to that? I really, again, I'm not going to make up an answer here because I really have not dealt with that issue, and so I'm not going to answer it.
Thank you, Mr. Wills. Mr. Gosar?
Well, I think that that's a court order, and you're having to comply with a court order. That said, every case is different, and so I think that overall, the overall arching idea is you have to comply with the court order and to do what you need to do. If it is to have that garnishment stepped up, you know, you don't want to end up hurting everybody in the process by making that too onerous. But that, you know, that is a court order, and we are a nation of laws, and you have to comply with that court order. And so for me, this is pretty straightforward. I think that you have to follow the law.
Thank you, Mr. Gosar, and I'll ask you to field this one first. This one's actually not from me, but it's the one I would have asked if I'd have been given a question. I understand that Wyoming has a huge rainy day fund while our municipalities languish for money to maintain necessary infrastructure. Would you be willing to limit the increase in the rainy day fund and increase disbursements to our cities and county governments?
Well, you know, I think this is something that as I walk around Wyoming, people say, you know, if you're governor, you should treat the government like a business, and I agree with that. I think that that's a smart way to do it. And no business that I know, the business that I run, refuses to invest in its people and its infrastructure. I think you see some, with dumps and landfills, huge tickets and price tags coming that people didn't expect. With water bills, you see huge price tags in water systems. And so here's an opportunity to invest in your infrastructure. Here's an opportunity to take that money and put it to good use. I think too often we put this money away and put them in coffee cans, and some of those coffee cans are nearly 50 years old, and maybe those ideas aren't even around, don't even exist for the reason that money was stashed away, and some of them earn less than 1% of interest. And so here's an opportunity to help your municipalities. You know, if you don't invest, if you don't in your cities and towns and infrastructures and peoples, then I don't think you set in much of a future for you. And after all, I think that's what we're hoping for, is a future where people want to come, where businesses want to be based, where people are employed and have good schools and good roads and reliable systems. And I think that's important. And yes, I think we should spend more on infrastructure.
Thank you, Mr. Gosar. Mr. Wills, same question.
Yeah, the question wasn't infrastructure. The question was money for municipalities and local government. I have no problem with spending money on infrastructure. I do have a problem with the state funding normal operating, salaries, things like that. I think government at all levels needs to be made more accountable and more frugal. And yes, there is far too much money in our rainy day funds. Right now, between the rainy day funds and the pensions and a dozen other coffee cans, the reality is there's $18 billion sitting there, most of it in investment accounts with Wall Street bankers. And that is just ludicrous as far as I'm concerned, because we have needs in the state for infrastructure, and we have a high tax structure. And I know people will look at me and roll their eyes and say, no, we don't. The only advantage we have over many other states is the fact that we don't have an income tax. In many other regards, if not most other regards, we're actually a moderate tax state or a high tax state. From the property tax you pay on your license plates, you guys know this here in Newcastle, when you buy a new $30,000 car, you're going to pay $750 or more for your license plate here, and you can go register it over in Rapid City for $50 or something like that. So the reality is we should be decreasing the taxes, decreasing the spending. Now, we have to do that intelligently. For example, I'm proposing a 1-cent decrease in the state sales tax. We could afford that as a state. We wouldn't put quite as much money away in these rainy day funds. Interestingly, the constitutional rainy day fund doesn't even have any means available to take money out of that fund. So the whole funding model and everything that goes on in the state is really, really messed up and needs to be totally overhauled.
Thank you, Mr. Wills. Unfortunately, we are running out of time, and I'm not going to be able to get to all the questions that I've had submitted to me. We've got time for a couple more, though. And education is the hot button topic. I'm sure you're encountering that all over the state. So this is an education question, Mr. Wills. Should the state of Wyoming continue to spend millions of dollars to out-of-state consultants to fix education? And as governor, will you support local school boards, county commissioners, etc.? Also, will you support state boards that are controlled by citizens, such as the Wyoming Livestock Board?
Yes. Citizen input is very, very important. I'm not sure what the Livestock Board has to do with spending money on education consultants. If you don't know what's going on, there's a whitewash going on that basically is going to say that Common Core is a good thing and that an appointed Department of Education director is a good thing. And the way they did this is they are funding, the governor and the powers that be, are funding several studies, but the one that I think is being referred to in this question, to come back with a preconceived answer that we need to have an appointed an appointed director of the Department of Education. And so this gets back to the question that I answered earlier with regard to what they did to Cindy Hill. The out-of-state consultants business in Wyoming is very lucrative. These guys come here and they can get contracts to tell us that our roads are broken down, to tell us that our education system is antiquated, to tell us we need Common Core, to tell us all these other things. And the reality is you can get a consultant to come in and get any study that is the way you want it to be. It goes to this concept that if you look at the numbers in one direction, you can come to one conclusion, but if you look at them another way, you can come to another conclusion. The reality is it's a political question that should be answered by the legislature and should be answered by the people. And when it's answered by the bureaucracy in Cheyenne, I guarantee it's for their own benefit. So no, I don't like the concept of outside consultants being brought in to tell us how we should run the state of Wyoming.
Thank you, Mr. Wills. Mr. Gosar.
Well, I think that I too think that much of our expertise lies right here in this state, and I wish that we would spend more time with those folks. With regard to education, there is no silver bullet, and I think for too often we have bounced around from silver bullet to silver bullet. The most effective parts of education, whether it be Finland or South Korea or the United States, is a motivated professional educator with kids ready to learn and a community that supports it. Everything else, whether it be the Common Core or testing, is just a tool. I think we've placed much too much emphasis on testing. A test should help improve your instructional quality. A test should help make your educational facility better. And right now, that's just not happening. Right now, we get our test scores from our statewide assessments in the summer, August of the year, 4 or 5 months after those people have left, either graduated or moved on to the next grade. That doesn't seem to make a whole lot of sense. And so how do we make an education system better? You invest in people, you invest in communities, and you try to tell them, this is important. This is your gateway. You have early childhood education because that's where you can start. That makes the most sense. That's money well spent. And so I think if you look about, you could trust your experts in Wyoming. There are quite a few, and I meet them all the time. And don't overlook the people that clean the facilities or staff. I was a janitor once, and there's a lot of information, a lot of good information in a janitor's closet because those people observe and they've been around. And I think that those experts need to be heard a lot more too.
Thank you, Mr. Gosar. Unfortunately, we are pretty much out of time, so I will give you now each 2 minutes for a closing statement, but as a way to kind of sneak one more question in there while we do it, maybe keep this in mind as you close, this question that was submitted online, and let us know, what would your first 30 days in office look like, especially considering how quickly the legislature will be in session and how fast you'll have to go to work?
Well, I'd like to thank everybody who came tonight. It's really important. I'd like to take time to thank you, Bob, and RT Communications, Weston One. This was something that I think is long overdue in Wyoming politics, and I'm so glad, Don, that you joined me tonight. I really do appreciate it. So what do your first 30 days look like? You look at the issues that face you, and you try to gather people in your state of all walks of life that are experts in those fields, and you don't pay attention to political ideology. You say, this is an opportunity to really do something big. I'm a believer in dreaming, and I'm a believer in setting the path. And then I'm a big believer in taking input and then going down to work. And for me, those are the ways that you move forward. For me, education and healthcare and an economic that's more diversified, those are things that we could start right away. I think for me, I would ask, as the legislature came in, to find somebody to sponsor the removal of SF 104. I think it's a divisive issue, and from there, we need to move forward. And I think that alleviates that whole painful lesson on what happens when you sometimes don't listen to the people of Wyoming. I think as I travel around the state, whether you're a Republican, Democrat, or Independent, what was done with SF 104 just doesn't feel right, just didn't smell right. And I think that you have to eliminate that so that you have a clean slate and a way to go forward. So thank you very much. I appreciate you coming, and it's been a wonderful opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. Gosar. Mr. Wills?
Well, thank you. I also would like to thank the sponsors and RT Communications and the school district and your organization. Quite frankly, I will do nothing but listen for the first 30 days, with a couple of exceptions that I'll talk about in a second. The way that the funding mechanisms work in Cheyenne is completely opaque. I have tried to get in to understand where the money is, what the purpose of the money is, where it's being spent, and so on and so forth. It is absolutely a maze down there. Again, you might call me a conspiracy theorist, but I think they try to make it complicated so that both you, the voters, and an outside group can't figure out actually what's going on. So I will be digging for the first 30 days that I am governor, trying to figure out what's going on, where the bodies are buried, where the money is, and what's really going on down there. With that said, there's one thing that I will do immediately, and that's I will close the Refugee Resettlement Center that Governor Meade has instituted without any legislative authority whatsoever. I don't know if you know this, but he sent a letter to the federal government a year ago saying he wanted to initiate the institution of a refugee resettlement center in Wyoming, and it happened without any input from the legislature, and I don't even know about any funding source or whatever. It's supposedly a private-public partnership. There are some group of Somalis that are now in the state of Wyoming. I can't get information on what this thing is, but I know it's wrong, and so in the first 30 days, I will close that refugee resettlement center or program or whatever it is. So I'm saddened that we haven't had a chance to talk about that issue or the issue of Ebola. But I'm happy that this took place, and I want to thank everybody who sponsored this thing and invited me here tonight.
Thank you, Mr. Wills, and that does conclude the time we have for tonight's debate. I was remiss at the beginning in not encouraging all of you who attended to warmly welcome our two guests. It says a lot about both of them that they're willing to come to a small community and hold this debate tonight. So if we could please have a very warm round of applause for both candidates.
Thank you.